Hello, this is Michelle at East Ave Art, and today I'm painting something very much inspired by the enormous amount of rain that we've been getting here in the Northeast. So I started by sketching the hunter rain boots, and I actually decided to sketch on my tracing paper with my sketchbook kind of behind it, just to kind of help me see a little bit better. I wouldn't see on my gray desk very well. And I like to sketch onto tracing paper because I feel like that helps me transfer it over to the watercolor paper. I don't like to sketch on my watercolor paper because it is 100% cotton. It doesn't take very well to erasing. And as you can see, I do a lot of erasing. I should also mention that today I'm joined by my little cat, Sebastian. He's been a little bit clingy lately, and he didn't want to give up his little space on the desk. This is my art desk that he spends most of his day on when I'm working my 9-to-5 job. So he didn't really want to give it up when I transitioned over to working on my art. And I didn't have the heart to move him. So he is going to be joining us for most of this tutorial, I think. Anyway, I decided to just do the tops of the person's legs above the hunter boots, and then I'm going to do like some kind of water splashes as well. But here I'm just kind of getting my sketch down. So once I finish the sketch in pencil, I like to go over it with a fine liner and just kind of get it sort of perfected how I like it. I also like to go over it with a fine liner because the way that I transfer it is I just kind of scribble in pencil marks on the back of my sketch and then retrace it onto my watercolor paper. So it actually really helps me to have ink on this sketch because I sometimes notice that I lose track of where the drawing is from all of the scribbles and pencil on the back. And so you'll see what I mean in a second. Yeah, so as you can see, I just kind of flip it over and put my pencil to paper there. And I've noticed sometimes when I do this without putting the ink on the other side, I have trouble seeing where my original sketch was when I flip it over to do the transfer. So I know it sounds kind of basic, but honestly, it really helps to have the ink there to guide you when you transfer it over. And here it is ready to be transferred. And first thing I'll do with my watercolor paper is I like to have a nice like border with washi tape. And then I like to tape it down with a little bit of washi tape there when I make the transfer so that my tracing paper doesn't move and mess up the transfer process. And there you can see I'm just kind of going over my sketch. And now that I have a light sketch on my watercolor paper, I'm going to go in and put where I want all of the rain droplets and the splashes to appear. And so I'm just kind of drawing like little, I don't know, just kind of silly little splashes and sort of wonky circles to achieve that effect. Once I decide where all my raindrops and splashes go, I get my masking fluid, and I think that was Winsor & Newton, and I pour a little bit into, that little jar there, and I'm going to put the masking fluid where I drew all of the splashes, and I'm going to have to let that dry, so it does take a minute for it to dry. I think to me, it takes a little bit longer than the watercolor itself does, so just, keep that in mind. But this will protect the paper from any of the paint that I'll be applying. So this is a really great time saver, and it just makes your painting a little bit more efficient. Even though you have to wait for it to dry, it's much easier than having to avoid all of these little spots if you were actually trying to do this while you were painting. So it's probably not super interesting to watch this process, so I'm going to speed ahead to my next step. So I've waited for all of those splashes to dry, and you can actually see they dry a little bit darker. I'm going to get my watercolor paints activated with my spray bottle, and I'm going to start mixing up some paints. So I decided to do yellow rain boots and sort of purple leggings. And the reason being, I think that yellow and purple go really nicely together. They're complementary colors. They sit opposite of each other on the color wheel. So they actually kind of like have a harmonious relationship and look really nice together. So I decided that before I even started to paint. And I'm also going to mix up some blues and grays and even put a little bit of green for the background because I want that to be kind of like loose and a little bit murky. And I'm actually going to mix up a couple of different blues. I'm going to have a lighter blue and a sort of darker blue. I need those variations to achieve some of the reflection and like the I guess like the ripples and the puddles. And like always with watercolor painting, I will start with like the lightest color. So a lot of times I'll mix up a really, really light, watery version of a color first, because you can always build up the color and add darkness, but you can't make it lighter. So you can see I'm kind of messing around with these paints and trying to add water and trying to lighten them up a little bit because I don't want to start too dark. All right, so I got a few of my colors mixed up and I'm ready to hit the page. I definitely made sure that the masking fluid is completely dry. And one of the things that I should have mentioned when I was talking about applying the masking fluid is make sure you really, really clean your brush after you've done that because it will gum it up. And I really recommend not using a very good brush for that. So nothing of any quality. Sometimes I just use like the craft paint brushes that you buy at like CVS for that task because I just really don't want to waste my good brushes on that. So definitely something to think about. So at this point, I'm just going to start filling in where I'm drawn in my boots and see how this kind of shapes up. So while my paint is still wet, I'm going to add in a little bit of purple to my yellow to get a nice shadow color. So complementary colors can look nice beside each other, but you can also add a color's complementary color to it to get like a really kind of natural shadow. Like sometimes people want to just add black to get a shadow, and it doesn't quite look as natural. So you can see while the paint is still wet, I'm adding in that shadow color to get a little soft blend. Oh yes, and Sebastian came back to join us for this part, and he's kind of like overseeing the painting here. I just thought this was like really cute that he was like wanted to be a part of things. So anyway, and so back to my painting. So I made sure that my boots dried before I started this next part. And I also switched to a much larger brush because I wanted to use wet into wet and I had to move fast so that my paper would stay wet and I would get some nice natural blends. So two things happened. I waited for my boots to dry, and I'm also really applying down water pretty quickly so that I can just drop in the color and sort of let the watercolor magic happen. And so I'm going to put in like some brown because I wanted some like brown streaks. And then I'm going to come in with the blue as well. And so I'm just kind of laying down some color, not really thinking about it too much. I mean, this is very watery. The watercolor itself is really watery. and I'm just gonna kind of drop in this color and see how they mix. And so again, I just want to reiterate that I'm trying to start pretty light. If it looks a little too dark and overdone, I will lift up some of the paint and then just sort of deposit it on my paper towel there. And I'm just playing with the color even as I go. I'm like adding in some gray because I want that foreground to start out pretty light. And I think it's just best I'll just kind of like let you observe how I went about this. So I'm thinking that around the boots, I want to put down a little bit of a thicker, darker consistency, just to kind of get a little bit of like a shadow effect from the boots and the legs that are in frame. And I also wanted to achieve the same effect in front of the boots, that the boots would kind of be reflecting off of the puddles that are in front of it. So that's why I've kind of put down, while everything is still wet and I can get some really nice blends, I put down this like kind of darker, more indigo color beside the boots and also in front of them. And I also went with a little bit of a darker indigo in the background too, just kind of building up that color. This I think you can do based on your preferences, how you like it to look. And I'm also going to start thinking about adding in some ripples to get that sense of like the reflectiveness of the water as well. So in this part, I started adding some of these ripples, and you can see like everything is still wet, so it kind of blends out in a nice way. I think that's kind of satisfying. But I'm also starting out with like a really light color because the color in the foreground is still pretty light. I'm still deciding how dark I want it. So that's just something to be mindful of, the values of the colors. Like you don't want the puddle ripples to be so much darker than the overall puddle. So that was something I focused on a lot as I was completing this piece. And then again, just to repeat myself, I'm slowly building up the dark color and going in at different points with a somewhat darker color and just seeing how I like it. Again, you can build this up gradually. There's no need to like rush it. And still, as I keep building up my painting, I'm adding little ripples here and there, seeing how I like that appearance, especially in the foreground. And, I did a lot of just sort of like deciding as I went how to do this painting. I didn't have like a really structured plan about it. So I don't know. I just kind of thought it'd be fun to have some squiggly lines to show the ripples. I did a few of the where you see kind of the circle from the raindrop. So I just tried to mix it up and see what I ended up with. And at this point, I felt like I kind of needed a little bit of a break from the puddles and the reflections. So I just went ahead and added that little like red that you see on the Hunter Boots logo, just to kind of give myself a break, I think. And at this point, I was seeing sort of the paint is kind of drying, and it seemed to be drying really light to me. So I decided to go in with a thicker consistency of that kind of indigo gray mix and add a little bit more of like the ripples and the reflective pieces just to start kind of building up the color a little bit more. And again, I'm getting a little bit more aggressive, I guess, with the indigo and building up that color even more. One thing I decided to do here was actually to add a little bit of shadow anywhere where I had like big splashes coming up from the puddles. And I think that like kind of worked pretty well ultimately later. But that's kind of what I'm working on here. Okay, so once my whole painting dries, and so everything has to be dry, I can pull up my art masking fluid just with my eraser and a little bit of, sometimes you just have to clear it away with your hand there as well. Okay, and I got all of the art masking fluid off of my painting, and I'm just using my little like desk vacuum that Sebastian finds really fascinating. Look at how cute he is. Anyway, so now that you can see that this masking fluid really protected the paper. So I'm like putting in a very watery gray, as sort of a base for these raindrops. I don't think it would look natural for them to be completely as white as the paper. So I'm just dropping in this kind of really light gray. And then I'll put a little bit of a darker gray on some of them just to kind of like vary it up. The raindrops that are on and the splashes that are on the Hunter Boots, I tried to pull in a little bit of like a gray yellow, because since it's water, it would show some of the color in the reflection. At this point, I'm adding in a very light gray where the big splash is at the front. And I even tried to do like how I painted that. I tried to make it almost like a wave where I just kind of did little swipes, rather than just like a clean stroke across, like little kind of vertical stripes, just to give it that sense of water. And then I went in with a darker, kind of like more of an indigo, and I put shadows kind of around those splashes. Again, just to kind of emphasize that it's water, but it's also 3D, like it's splashing up into the air, so it would be casting a shadow on the water that's below it. And next I grabbed my white gouache, and that's a little bit of a thicker consistency. It is still, it's watercolor gouache, but it is thicker and it can cover up watercolor. And I'm just kind of adding a little bit of white to some of my splashes and raindrops just to kind of give a little bit of highlight there, to kind of make it look a little bit more realistic. Pretty much finishes it up. All that was left was to peel off the washi tape, and you can see those nice boundaries that that leaves, and that's my finished product. I hope you liked this and learned something. If you'd like to see more, please hit like and subscribe. Thanks.